The deafening explosion shook the ground as flames engulfed the small two-story house at the end of Maple Street. Neighbors stood frozen in horror, watching helplessly as thick black smoke billowed into the night sky. In the midst of the chaos, a German shepherd emerged from the flames, dragging something heavy behind him. It was James Wilson, unconscious but alive, his clothing singed and face covered in soot. Rex, his loyal service dog, had pulled his blind owner to safety moments before the entire house collapsed. Deputy Fire Chief Rodriguez, first on the scene, couldn't believe his eyes. "In 20 years fighting fires, I've never seen anything like it," he later told reporters, his voice still trembling. "That dog knew exactly what to do, drag his owner to safety and then position himself as a shield against falling debris." The crowd gathered behind the hastily erected barricade gasped collectively as a secondary explosion sent glass and splintered wood flying across the yard. Officer Jenny Michaels, who had served with James during their second tour, pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down her face. "James! James!" she screamed, fighting against the restraining arms of fellow officer Marcus Dawson. "Let me through!" "He saved my life in Kandahar." But how did Rex know the danger that was coming? What made this ordinary service dog sense the impending disaster when no one else could? Dr. Eleanor Franklin, the veterinary behaviorist who had helped train Rex after his military service, arrived at the scene and watched in amazement as paramedics tended to James while Rex refused to leave his side. "There's something special about that bond," she whispered to Captain Rodriguez. "Something science can't fully explain." The answer would leave everyone speechless. The morning had started like any other in the quiet neighborhood of Riverside. James Wilson, a 52-year-old veteran who had lost his sight during his final tour in Afghanistan, sat on his front porch, enjoying the warm spring breeze. Beside him was Rex, his German Shepherd service dog, a constant companion for the past 5 years. "Beautiful day today, isn't it, Rex?" James said softly, his hand gently stroking the dog's thick fur. Rex wagged his tail in response but seemed distracted. His ears were perked up, and his body was unusually tense. James, attuned to his dog's behavior, noticed the change immediately. "What is it, boy?" "Something bothering you?" James asked, concern edging into his voice. Across the street, Margaret Winters, an elderly widow who brought Rex treats every Sunday, paused while tending her prize-winning roses. She noticed Rex's strange behavior and frowned. "Everything okay over there, James?" she called, setting down her gardening shears. "I think so," James replied, uncertainty evident in his voice. "Rex is just acting strange today." Margaret crossed the street, wiping soil from her weathered hands onto her gardening apron. At 78, she'd developed a keen eye for trouble, having survived both her husband's long illness and the devastating tornado of '97. "That's not his 'I see a squirrel' behavior," she observed, studying Rex carefully. "That's his alert posture." James nodded slowly. "You're right. I'm getting worried." Margaret placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. "My Harold always said animals know things before we do. Remember last spring when all the birds flew south 2 weeks early right before that freak blizzard?" Down the street, mailman Frank Torres noticed the gathering on James's porch and adjusted his route to stop there first. Frank had served with James's older brother Michael, who hadn't made it back from their tour. He felt a responsibility to keep an eye on James. "Morning, folks," Frank called, climbing the 3 porch steps. Rex, normally friendly with Frank, barely acknowledged him. "That's not like him at all," Frank murmured, concerned. Rex had been more than just a guide dog for James. After losing his sight and struggling with PTSD, James had fallen into a deep depression until Rex came into his life. The former military K-9, who had served 2 tours detecting explosives, had been retrained as a service animal. The bond they formed went beyond the typical handler-dog relationship. They understood each other on an almost spiritual level. "Probably just a squirrel," James chuckled, trying to reassure himself. But deep down, he knew better. Rex's behavior wasn't typical. Colonel Davidson, who had overseen Rex's training in the K9 unit, had once told James, "This dog doesn't just detect explosives, he reads intentions. We had a training exercise where we planted dummy IEDs, and Rex ignored all but one, the one planted by the trainer playing the role of insurgent. Somehow he knew the difference." As the day progressed, Rex's strange behavior intensified. He paced around the house, whining softly, and repeatedly returned to the basement door, pawing at it urgently. James had never seen him act this way before. The phone rang, interrupting James's thoughts. It was Dr. Emilia Santos, the VA therapist who had helped pair James with Rex. Their weekly check-in wasn't scheduled until tomorrow. "James, I had the strangest feeling I should call you today," Emilia said, her Colombian accent more pronounced when worried. "Is everything all right?" "I'm not sure," James admitted, explaining Rex's behavior. "I've never seen him this agitated." "Trust him," Emilia said firmly. "Remember Staff Sergeant Williams? His service dog detected his heart attack 20 minutes before it happened. These animals have abilities we're only beginning to understand." As James hung up, his thoughts drifted to his time at Walter Reed, where he'd met Williams. The sergeant had described how his dog had refused to leave the room, blocking the door and whining until Williams's wife called an ambulance, saving his life when his heart had suddenly failed. James moved toward the basement door, where Rex continued his frantic pawing. The memory of Williams gave James a chill. What if Rex was trying to tell him something equally important? "Rex, calm down," James said firmly, but the dog was insistent, tugging at James's sleeve and pulling him toward the basement door. James's neighbor, Sarah Miller, had stopped by to deliver some groceries when she noticed Rex's unusual behavior. A former emergency room nurse who had pivoted to writing medical thrillers after a shoulder injury, Sarah had developed a finely tuned sense for trouble. "Is everything okay with Rex?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "I've never seen him this agitated before." James sighed, his brow furrowed with worry. "I don't know, Sarah. He's been like this all morning. Something's bothering him, but I can't figure out what it is." Sarah set down the grocery bags on the kitchen counter, her medical training kicking in as she observed Rex's behavior with clinical interest. Her publisher was pushing her for a new novel, and she'd been experiencing writer's block for weeks, but Rex's strange behavior sparked her professional curiosity. "Have you changed anything recently? New cleaning products, furniture, electrical work?" she asked, recalling a case from her nursing days when a patient's dog had detected a faulty electrical outlet days before it sparked a fire. "Nothing that I can think of," James replied. "The gas company did some routine maintenance in the neighborhood last week, but that was outside work." Sarah, who had known Rex since James first brought him home, approached the dog cautiously. Rex normally greeted her with enthusiastic tail wags. He had a special fondness for Sarah after she had stayed with James during his pneumonia last winter, sneaking Rex extra treats and taking him for pre-dawn runs. But today, he barely acknowledged her presence, his focus entirely on the basement door. "Maybe he hears something we can't?" Sarah suggested. "Animals have sharper senses than we do." Behind them, Sarah's 13-year-old son Dylan appeared in the doorway, skateboard under his arm. He'd been helping James with yard work every weekend since his father's deployment to Korea 6 months ago. "Mr. Wilson, what's wrong with Rex?" Dylan asked, setting his skateboard aside. The boy had developed a special bond with the dog, often reading his homework aloud to Rex when struggling with difficult passages. "We're not sure," Sarah answered, noticing how Rex briefly glanced at Dylan before returning his attention to the basement door, whining more urgently now. James nodded, remembering Rex's military training. When he was in Afghanistan, Rex could detect things that even the most sophisticated equipment missed. His handler once told me he saved an entire platoon by identifying an IED that had been overlooked during a standard sweep. Major Castillo, Rex's former handler, had recounted the story during a visit last Veterans Day. We were clearing a village near Kandahar. Every building had been swept clean by 2 teams with detection equipment. Rex was actually off duty, resting in the transport vehicle, when he suddenly broke free from his restraints, sprinted across the compound, and planted himself in front of a wall that had already been cleared. He wouldn't budge, just kept giving his alert signal. When we re-inspected, we found a sophisticated pressure plate IED that would have triggered when the wall settled from vibrations of our convoy. As Sarah was leaving, Rex suddenly barked, a sharp, authoritative sound that made both humans jump. It wasn't his normal bark. It was his alert signal, something he had been trained to do when he detected explosives during his military service. "Rex, what is it?" James asked, his heart racing. He knew that bark. He'd heard stories about it from Rex's former handler, how that specific bark had saved countless lives in the field. Dylan, who had been hovering in the doorway, stepped backward, nearly tripping over his skateboard. "That sounded different," he said, eyes wide, like when the police dogs at the demonstration give an alert. "It is different," James confirmed grimly. "That's his explosive detection signal." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her editor demanding an update on her manuscript, but she ignored it, watching as Rex continued barking, pulling James toward the basement door with increasing urgency. Something was seriously wrong. "Mom, should we call the fire department?" Dylan whispered, frightened by the intensity of Rex's behavior. "Remember when Aunt Celia's carbon monoxide detector went off and they found a crack in her furnace?" Sarah bit her lip, considering. Her sister's near miss last winter had been a warning to the whole family. The firefighters had told them that another few hours of exposure would have been fatal. "Let's not jump to conclusions," she said, though her medical training was sending alarm bells ringing in her mind. "But I think we definitely need to investigate what Rex is trying to tell us." "Should we call someone?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. James hesitated, not wanting to cause a scene over what might be nothing. "Let me check the basement first. Maybe there's a water leak or something that's bothering him." "James, if Rex is this concerned, maybe we should take it seriously," Sarah insisted. "Remember when he detected Mrs. Peterson's gas leak last year before anyone else noticed?" Mrs. Peterson, a retired chemistry teacher with early-stage dementia, had forgotten to turn off her stove completely. The leak had been minor, barely perceptible, but Rex had reacted instantly. The gas company technician, Hector Ramirez, had been amazed at the dog's sensitivity and later brought his team to observe Rex during a training demonstration. "That dog puts our equipment to shame," Hector had joked to James afterward. "You should rent him out to the gas company." James remembered all too well. Rex had refused to guide James past their elderly neighbor's house one morning, instead pulling him to her front door and barking incessantly. When Mrs. Peterson answered, Rex had barged in and led them straight to her kitchen, where they discovered a dangerous gas leak from her stove. "You're right," James conceded. "Can you help me check the basement?" Dylan shifted from foot to foot, anxiety evident in his voice. "I can help too, Mr. Wilson. I just started the emergency preparedness badge in Scouts." Sarah smiled despite her concern. "That's very brave, Dylan, but I think you should wait up here. If we need to evacuate quickly, I need to know you're safe and ready to help Mr. Wilson if necessary." Dylan nodded seriously, understanding the responsibility being placed on him. "I'll keep my phone ready to call 911. James felt for his cane, a habit when feeling anxious despite not needing it with Rex guiding him. "Sarah, did you notice anything unusual when you were here yesterday?" "Nothing," Sarah replied, trying to remember details. "Although the basement did feel unusually warm when I went down to get that jar of peaches you offered." Her mention of the basement's temperature triggered a memory for James. 3 days ago, The Wilkinsons across the street had their water heater replaced after their old one had begun making strange noises, clicking and pinging that increased over several days before finally giving out completely. "I had the furnace service last month," James said slowly. "But the technician did mention the water heater was getting old. Could that be what Rex is sensing?" Sarah nodded and carefully opened the basement door. The moment it opened, Rex darted down the stairs, barking frantically. James and Sarah followed him, with Sarah describing what she saw as they descended. "Everything looks normal. Wait," Sarah stopped suddenly. "There's a strange smell down here. Something chemical." James couldn't see the basement, but his other senses had become heightened since losing his sight. Now that Sarah mentioned it, he could detect a faint, unusual odor in the air. It reminded him of the forward operating base where he'd been stationed, particularly the day a generator had malfunctioned, creating a similar acrid smell just before technician specialist Rivera had shut everything down. "Luis would know what this is," James murmured, thinking of his former squad mate who had specialized in equipment maintenance. He always said you could smell trouble before you could see it. Rex led them to the far corner of the basement, where the water heater and furnace were located. He stopped in front of the furnace, barking and pawing at the ground. The concrete floor felt unusually warm under James's feet, and he could hear a faint hissing sound beneath Rex's barking. Sarah bent down to inspect the area. "James, there's water around your furnace, and some sort of residue on the pipes. They look corroded." "What color is the residue?" James asked, recalling his father's teaching. Before losing his sight, James had often helped his father, a plumber by trade, on weekend jobs. His father had taught him that different colors of corrosion could indicate different problems: green for copper oxidation, white for aluminum, reddish-brown for iron. "It's greenish-white, and there's a lot of it," Sarah answered, her voice growing more concerned. "And the water heater connections look wrong somehow, like they're stressed." James's father had always warned about the dangers of improper connections, especially with gas appliances. "A gas leak doesn't announce itself with fanfare, son," he'd say. "It waits silently until the worst possible moment." James felt a chill run down his spine. "Call the gas company. Now." Dylan appeared at the top of the stairs, breaking his promise to stay in the kitchen. "Mom? Mr. Wilson? Rex is acting even weirder now. He keeps running up and down the stairs like he wants us all to leave." Sarah looked at her son, then back at the corroded pipes. She pulled out her phone and dialed, her nursing experience telling her that evacuation was the only safe option. She'd seen too many preventable tragedies in the ER to ignore the warning signs in front of her. "And tell them to hurry," James added grimly. "I think we might be sitting on a time bomb." Within 20 minutes, a technician from the gas company arrived. After a brief inspection, his face turned grave. "Sir, you have a serious gas leak," he explained, his voice tense. "And there's carbon monoxide building up in your home. If your dog hadn't alerted you, this could have led to an explosion or silent poisoning while you slept tonight." The technician, Dave Martinez, had dealt with his share of emergencies in 15 years with the gas company, but he'd rarely seen a situation this precarious where the residents weren't already showing symptoms. His own cousin had lost 2 family members to carbon monoxide poisoning during a winter storm in Colorado 3 years ago. "The main line connection to your water heater has corroded severely, and there's a hairline fracture in your furnace's exhaust system," Dave explained, already on his radio calling for backup. "The combination is creating both a gas leak and carbon monoxide buildup." James felt the blood drain from his face. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I'm evacuating your house immediately," the technician replied firmly. "The levels are rising rapidly. I've already called emergency services. They need to set up a perimeter and evacuate your neighbors too." Dave had witnessed a similar situation in an apartment complex last winter. By the time they'd detected the leak, it had been moments away from catastrophic failure. Only luck and quick action had prevented casualties. As they hurried out of the house, James clutched Rex's harness tightly, a flood of emotions washing over him. Once again, Rex had saved his life, sensing danger that no human could detect until it was too late. "Does Mr. Wilson need to take anything with him?" Dylan asked earnestly, hovering near the front door with James's jacket in his hands. "Just yourselves and the dog," Dave answered firmly. "Nothing else is worth the risk." Outside, the spring day continued as if nothing was wrong. Birds singing, children playing further down the street. The contrast between the peaceful neighborhood and the danger lurking in James's basement was jarring. Sarah called her sister, asking if James could stay with her temporarily. "Celia, it's an emergency. Remember our carbon monoxide scare? James is dealing with something similar but potentially worse." "Of course he can stay," Celia responded immediately. "And Rex, too. I'll set up the guest room now." As Sarah relayed the good news to James, Dave was already establishing a safety perimeter, instructing newly arrived colleagues to begin evacuating houses on either side of James's home. "You were minutes away from a major disaster," Dave told James quietly. "That dog of yours is extraordinary." Outside, neighbors gathered as emergency vehicles arrived with flashing lights and blaring sirens. The fire department established a safety perimeter around James's house, while gas company workers rushed to address the leak. Fire Captain Elena Rodriguez, who had responded to countless gas leaks in her 22 years of service, supervised the evacuation. Her father had been blinded in a refinery accident when she was a child, so she felt a special connection to James's situation. "Everyone needs to move back at least 200 feet, she ordered, her authoritative voice carrying across the growing crowd. "This is not a spectator event." Margaret Winters, still in her gardening apron, had organized a makeshift reception area on her front lawn, offering water and chairs to displaced neighbors. "James, you and Rex come sit over here," she called, waving them toward a shaded spot under her maple tree. "How did your dog know?" the gas company technician asked in amazement. "We usually need specialized equipment to detect leaks this early." Dr. Franklin, the veterinary behaviorist who had helped train Rex, arrived on the scene after receiving a call from Sarah. Rex was specifically trained to detect the chemical additives in explosive materials, she explained to Dave. "Many of those same compounds are present in natural gas additives, the mercaptans added to give gas its distinctive smell." James smiled, kneeling down to embrace Rex. He was a military K-9. Explosive detection was his specialty. I guess some skills never fade. Principal Whitaker from the elementary school 3 blocks away approached the safety line, concerned about dismissal procedures. "Do we need to implement our emergency protocols?" she asked Captain Rodriguez. "Not yet, but keep the children inside until we give the all clear," Rodriguez advised. "We're hoping to have this contained soon." But the danger wasn't over. As the technicians worked to shut off the main gas line, the pressure had already built to dangerous levels inside the house. "Everyone back!" shouted the fire chief suddenly. "The structure is compromised." Officer Jenny Michaels, who had served with James, pushed through the crowd to reach him, determined to help her former squad mate to safer ground. "James, we need to move further back," she urged, taking his arm. Just as they retreated to a safer distance, a deafening explosion ripped through the evening air. James's house erupted in flames, the force of the blast shattering windows and sending debris flying in all directions. Sarah gasped beside him. "Oh my God, James! If you and Rex had still been inside..." James couldn't see the destruction, but he could feel the intense heat of the flames, hear the crackling of fire consuming what had been his home for the past decade. The realization of how close they had come to disaster made his knees weak. Officer Michaels steadied him with a firm grip on his arm. "I've got you, Staff Sergeant," she said, using his former rank, a habit from their deployment days. "Just like that time outside Kabul, remember? We stick together." James nodded, grateful for her presence. During their tour, Jenny had pulled him from a burning Humvee after an IED strike. Now, years later, they found themselves once again escaping flames together. In the chaos that followed, James sat on the curb across the street, one arm wrapped tightly around Rex. Neighbors and emergency personnel moved around them in a blur of activity, but James's world had narrowed to just him and his dog. "You saved my life again, buddy," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "How can I ever repay you for that?" Dylan approached cautiously, his young face serious beyond his years. "Mr. Wilson? My mom says you can stay with us if you want. Our sofa pulls out into a bed, and I don't mind sharing my room with Rex." Before James could respond, Celia arrived, pushing through the crowd with determination. "James, thank goodness you're safe," she exclaimed, kneeling beside him. As Sarah's sister and a physical therapist who had worked with wounded veterans, Celia understood trauma all too well. "I've got the guest room ready for both of you," she said gently, placing a hand on Rex's head. "And I picked up some of that special food he likes." Rex, seemingly understanding the gravity of the situation, pressed closer to James's side, resting his head on his owner's lap. The connection between them transcended words, a bond forged through trauma, recovery, and now, survival. Captain Rodriguez approached with a paramedic. "Mr. Wilson, we need to check you for smoke inhalation and shock," she said professionally, though her eyes were kind. "Your dog, too. We have a veterinary technician on scene." "He goes where I go," James said firmly, his hand never leaving Rex's fur. "Of course," the captain agreed. "Heroes stay together." As they were led toward the ambulance, neighbors spontaneously began to applaud, not just for the first responders, but for the extraordinary dog who had sensed danger when no one else could, and saved not just his owner, but potentially the entire neighborhood.